Reveille, donks.
Look at us now, tip to tip. This is our life. This is our passion. That's the spirit we bring to this show.
I'm Luke Thomas.
I'm Brian Campbell.
This is Morning Kombat.
Oh, yeah, we ain't dead yet. We're back with a bang, guys. Morning Kombat is here. All things UFC 297 preview coming right at you. Welcome, January 17th. It's a Wednesday here in MK Land. Brian Campbell, the floral patterned BBC with that BDE, and the Average Joe Art crossover adorned Luke Thomas next to me. Luke, we are the best damn combat sports show, period. All right. We've scared a few people that we might be dying. No, it's the exact opposite. It's more like when Obi-Wan died and then his power got even greater.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of theories that people have floated about what's about to happen to us. And I want to be clear, not one of them is correct. So enjoy all of the completely ridiculous speculation. It's been fun to read, I have to say.
Yeah. We don't enjoy doing this to you, but we want to get better. We want to get bigger. We want to grow out and bang. So that's what's going to happen. But you've already heard our announcement of an announcement here. We're here today to set the stage for I want to say a fantastic pay-per-view on Saturday, but I'm not sure. It is the first pay-per-view card of the new year. It's going to go down at the 9th island of Toronto. I'm going to have to ask Max Holloway what number island we're on right now, but it's interesting, this card, and I think it's going to be interesting in what it kicks off for this new year that I do expect to be large, loaded UFC 300, so many things coming at it. And of course, I'm excited, Luke, about this middleweight title main event. But when you look at 297 as a whole, what is your pre-fight grade coming in?
Not great, BC. I'll have to pull it up here. I don't have the fight card in front of me. The last time they were here in Canada, or Toronto, I should say, let's see, UFC, I want to say 218, I think, something like that. I have to go back and double check. It was 5 years ago, and I went and looked. There was one Canadian on that main card, and it was Hakeem Dawodu. That was it. Now, I'm not saying that there's no good reason to put Canadians on a Canadian fight card. In fact, there's all kinds of good reasons. What I am saying to you, though, is the UFC customarily sometimes will go to a place, and they won't necessarily put people in the main event or even co-main event who are from there because they're trying to just get the biggest fight possible at that point in the calendar. And that is what happened. Max Holloway headlined that last contest when they were here for the title, I believe,
Ortega
against Brian Ortega. Ortega was that main event. So it's an interesting time where now you look at it, and there are many Canadians on this card, including some ones that do have some interesting promise. But there's no one in the main or co-main event who's Canadian, and the rest of the card is interesting but not great. And that main and co-main, the main event is good. The co-main event is as bland as can possibly be. So I don't think it's a horrible card. I don't want to sit there and be like, oh my God, it's the worst thing we've ever seen. That's really not fair. But at least relative to the last time they came to Toronto, it is it's a grand drop-off. It's not the same as that at all. No.
Well, there's certainly the potential of diamonds in the rough here of fights or single performances from risers that could break through and prove us wrong. But on paper, Luke, you got to go what? B-, C+ in terms of what you expect from pay-per-view, even though, again, I'm fired up for the main event. I'm fired up for the first fight of the pay-per-view card. I want to see a couple of one of those prospects, but, not your general fare of hit me over the head with something golden here, UFC, but we'll kick off the new year nonetheless.
Yeah, I think B is too high. I think C+, which I wouldn't normally do for a fight card that has 2 UFC title fights, because again, I want to say it one more time, the main event, perfectly legit, very excited for it. There's nothing wrong with that one at all. That part's fine. But that title fight for the women's bantamweight title fight feels like there is no interest about it, no momentum, no storyline, no rivalry, no nothing to that one. And frankly, it's not even all that interesting of a tactical battle. BC, I mentioned the last time they were in Toronto, this was their main card. It was, as we indicated, Holloway versus Ortega, Shevchenko versus Ioane and Jacek. Right, so we're talking a clash of titans in the women's game. Gunnar Nelson, Alex Oliveira, that was a fun fight for as long as it lasted. Hakeem Dawodu versus Kyle Bochniak. And then Thiago Santos versus Jimmy Manoa. There were more Canadians down the line on that card. Brad Katona was on it. Alexander Rakic was on it. Jessica Ai, Elias Theodorou, rest in peace, he was on as well. Gilbert Burns fought Olivier Aubin-Mercier, who then went to, obviously, PFL not long after this. So it had a lot more, I think, going for it relative to this one. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Canadians and speaking of Toronto, Luke, do you have anything to say about MK friend Aaron Bronstetter leaving TSN for Sportsnet just as the rights holder for the UFC in Canada switches hands? Abron back where he belongs, I think I would say. Would you agree with me?
Yeah, I think it's great for Canada that they've got a guy like Aaron Bronstetter who can deliver for them like that. He's been grinding in. I mean, for folks who don't know, those interviews that he does when he's on location at like a UFC event, I think there's been like a couple times there's been an exception to this, but typically he's by himself, number one, and number two, he's shooting off of a cell phone. Like they didn't give him much equipment, and he just thugged it out and made it work. And now he's got access to studios. Now he's got access to producers, and so I think his content's only going to get better from here. So a very richly deserving promotion for a guy like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to you, Abron. All right, Lucas. Blah, 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 blah. A reminder before we break it in and break it down and get all dirty with 297. MK, going to be back live Monday morning, so get ready. We're going to recap the action. But, Luke, you're also going to be live post-Saturday. You want to remind people of that, too.
Yes. Post-fight show, instant reaction, whatever you want to call it, live. As soon as the main event interview is over, we will be going live on youtube.com/morningcombat. So if you got a fiendin' for some pay-per-view reaction, we got you covered here at MK.
Yeah, MK still in the game as we continue to repair. It's like when you see a sign outside your favorite McDonald's that's like, pardon the visage for a few weeks. We're under construction, Luke. So are we right now. But special shout out to Mikey Mormile, CBS Sports on the ones and twos. Always behind us. Always has our back, Luke. All right. So he's behind the scenes today. We're going to get into it. Here we go. It's the pay-per-view this Saturday from Toronto. Let's talk about that main event because that's the main reason why we're all jacked up. This division is red hot entering the new year as Sean Strickland looks to make the first defense of that 185-pound title that he, I don't know, man, commandeered with as Luke Thomas would say, an audit of Israel Adesanya's striking game to pull that big upset over 5 rounds. His opponent, Dricus Du Plessis of South Africa, recovering from that injury that pulled him out of what would have been an immediate opportunity after becoming a number one contender when he steamrolled Robert Whittaker, and still one of the biggest upsets I remember in terms of my expectations coming in. Not only did that win catapult DDP to where he is now, it changed a lot of our opinions at where exactly he is in this rise as a hulking force in the division, but somebody who certainly improved his game along the way. Luke, before we get into this matchup of it, you can argue that people are just as excited for this fight as the tension between the two. We saw them brawl in the crowd at UFC 296 in December in Las Vegas, whether or not that was a purposeful seating chart plan from Dana White, as the conspiracy theorists, including Sean Stickland, are regularly spewing out. Either way, they got their highlight. They got their rage against each other. And it's certainly a matchup style-wise when you look at the odds that is very exciting. But again, before we get into that, storyline-wise, what do you make of Sean Strickland's comments? We asked that a lot in the history of covering Sean Strickland, but specifically, he has been saying this week that, look, we brawled, meaning him and DDP, over the accusations or comments regarding the childhood trauma that Strickland has endured. Strickland has basically said, look, if you bring that up again in any format, press conference, weigh-in, whatever, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to stab you. I forgot the exact verbiage, but it was. He
said he was going to stab him, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do we do with that, Luke? Just add it to the bin of ridiculousness that's been said on UFC microphones lately, or are you expecting fight week fireworks?
I wouldn't rule it out. I would not rule out fireworks, but I do think that it's one thing to get fighters, even experienced ones like these, to act a certain way when they're not cutting weight and they're just doing promotion and they're out there just kind of having fun, basically. You're going to get a certain kind of fighter. You're going to get a different one on fight week. You are going to get a different one. When they're cutting weight, that does also tend to make them more irritable, but it might make them more withdrawn or more excited to, or more willing, I should say, to just get through a process rather than to indulge in it. So I wouldn't rule it out. There are ways in which this could go, but if you actually follow what Sean Strickland said, he may have contradicted himself later, but from what I saw, he had said that he had messaged Dricus Du Plessis and was like, look, we don't need to do all this. We're going to have a great fight. We're going to kill each other. It's going to be amazing. We don't need to get into it. And oh, by the way, if you do, I'll stab you. And then Dricus Du Plessis, I think, had spoke to MMA Junkie this week saying yeah, there's really no need for it. He almost made it sound like I did it to prove a point. I don't need to keep proving it. So there is at least a risk. I think to that point, BC, they'll probably have some security on hand at the press conference. One never knows. But right. I honestly believe that these two guys, for all of those antics and for all of in the case of Sean Strickland, the repugnant public personality he seems to have, all of that is going to go by the wayside, and you're going to get two very experienced, very talented, very deserving, frankly, the right guys are in this fight, because it's also both of them, BC, they're one thing that is sort of common between them. They're a little bit accidental. We did not think that Sean Strickland was going to upset Izzy, and he did. I certainly did not think that Dricus Du Plessis was going to upset and stop Robert Whittaker, and that's exactly what he did. But here they are. It's a great, deserving fight, and it should be exciting on Saturday night.
Yeah, certainly. I like that you mentioned that it's a great matchup. They deserve to be here, but boy, would we not have predicted this a year ago, 2 years ago. I mean, look, is this the first UFC middleweight title fight not involving Israel Adesanya or Robert Whittaker since when? Since, like, I'm trying to think of that. I'm trying to think of the last time there was a title fight in this division without those two all-time greats.
Well, okay. Yes, that's true. And then if you look back, obviously Whittaker, the second time he fought Romero, it was a non-title fight because Romero missed weight, right? So, there's even a longer tradition than what you're sort of describing. But listen, I've said it before. Izzy, to me, is at worst your second best middleweight of all time. And I don't think any of that changes by what happened against Sean. The record of success he's had has been remarkable. I think only the great Anderson Silva has a claim to have something done better. But turnover happens sometimes in divisions when you least expect it, and sometimes it's much more authoritative. And frankly, once it happens, it's very hard to undo. And in fact, Izzy losing to Pereira, then winning, and then losing again after that sort of shows you he was able to get a moment of redemption. And who's to say he might have another one in the future? But usually once the turnover happens, you can claw back a little bit, and that was a big one. But it is now already in motion. The rest of these guys begin to move into place. And I think in this particular case, you have two guys who obviously, by the way, younger than Izzy and younger than Robert Whittaker as well. And so that speaks to how ruthless turnover can be. It speaks to how quick and authoritative sometimes it can be. And here they are. As I mentioned before, we did not expect these guys to be here, and they unequivocally earned their place, both in stopping Robert Whittaker and then shutting out basically Izzy in the way that I don't think Izzy won a round. He got knocked down, and he may have won round two, I think.
Round two was close, could have gone either way. Yeah.
But certainly. You get the point. Drops him in round one and then basically runs the table on him the rest of the way. A remarkable performance. You simply could not deny him, no matter how badly you wanted to. So here they are. I guess we'll see what happens.
Well, the answer is you'd have to go back to UFC 217 in 2017 when GSP defeated Michael Bisping for the UFC middleweight title as the last title fight not involving those two gentlemen. But Luke, to close, as we get into the odds here on what I asked you about the trash talk, will we see anything? Security is going to be tight. They do get fined, Luke, the UFC, by the commissions whenever there's a brawl. We always think that the UFC loves that. Well, they love it in the crowd when they can make it part of the video package. But you saw what they did with Leon Edwards and Colby Covington, keeping them far apart. I think we're going to see that again. Let's get into the matchup, though. The odds are close. FanDuel having the most updated recent ones. -138 is your champion, Sean Stickland, the betting favorite. +108, Dricus Du Plessis. So, Luke, it could go either way. They both have game plans that when they're able to carry out their A game, they can be absolutely dominant with that. Both are coming off of those breakthrough upset performances exactly because of that. How do you see their styles clashing, though, when you look at this more from a macro standpoint entering Saturday?
I would say that to me it's offense and defense. And I know that sounds like a very silly and almost stupid way to talk about it, but let me explain what I mean. In the case of Sean Strickland, you have good offense, but not necessarily overwhelming firepower. That's really not what he does. And what you saw, of course, against Izzy was this ability to absorb, block, parry, roll, all the different ways in which he had that modified Philly shell. He learned how to leg check really well as well. These are all things that he's pretty good at. But I would argue that he's going to be putting forward pressure while kind of trying to absorb what Dricus does. and slow the fight down to his pace, make Dricus think too much, make Dricus not react, right? And then Dricus, of course, is going to be trying to do the opposite. He's going to be trying to do blitzes. He's going to, by the way, he's good for nearly 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. He's good for almost 7 strikes per minute. It's really going to be about defining tempo. It's going to be about defining space. And it's going to be really about defining who is reacting to who. Of course, Sean's going to want to react, but if he's reacting to getting hit versus blocking, if he's reacting to this overwhelming like force that he has to deal with, well, that's one thing. But if he's able to block, parry, roll, and then slow it down, and then he can go when he wants, that's going to be very, very different.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you look at a friend of the program, Eric Nixick, and the great team over there at Extreme Couture that helped Sean Strickland with that game plan for Adesanya. Look, I still can't even believe it happened, right? They tossed a near perfect game over 5 rounds, neutralized Adesanya. You do wonder, there was so much high for Adesanya in that comeback knockout win over Alex Pereira to regain that title, or Alex, Luke, against Alex.
Yes.
But highs or lows or whatever, he was unable to make the adjustments that we assumed he would, meaning Adesanya against such a smart, defensive, but yet in your face striking game plan of the Philly shell of the pure boxing there from Strickland. But Luke, we talked about this recently on Morning Combat, and I want to bring it up. The difference in this matchup, though, and the reason why styles make fights, is that for as great as Adesanya is as a striker and with his takedown defense and all of that, once he was sort of solved there by Strickland, for whatever reason, he was unable, like I said, make adjustments and figure it out. The difference between him and DDP, at least on the surface, is it's a different type of style. The physicality is different. The wrestling success with the takedowns, the intention to do that. Can Sean Strickland, I guess is my question here, throw the same no-hitter, near-perfect game that he did against Adesanya against DDP, or will just that simple fact of MMA math and styles making fights make it unlikely entering this fight?
Man, this is why the odds are so close. It's very, very difficult to tell. I tend to think he'll have, at a bare minimum, here's what I would say. At a bare minimum, I think he'll have more trouble with Dricus early. So what could happen is he might have trouble with Dricus early and then not really be able to recover and then eventually lose or get stopped. Or he might have trouble with Dricus early, but then Dricus slows and you could turn the tide. Folks might forget this. Now, the first round between DDP and Darren Till was weird because Darren Till was either trapped against the fence or had his back taken at certain parts, and DDP was just unloading with this extraordinary amount of punches, which, by the way, kind of artificially raised some of those strikes landed per minute. It's not as high necessarily as those numbers indicate, absent the Till fight. But the Till fight happened, and he bombed on him. You might not recall that Till won the second round. And in fact, DDP was really getting tuned up a little bit there. Not too bad, but he kind of gassed himself out. The question is going to be, if Sean Strickland is able to both block and manage pace, that's great for him, but it's going to leave something in reserve for a very explosive, powerful, forward-moving guy. So, like, slowing down the fight is useful, but by itself doesn't really solve the problem. And that's where this kind of weird contradiction comes in. I think the thing that we have to sort of understand is Sean has very good takedown defense, which will help him. That's both true in open space and against the fence. I think that's going to change a little bit of what Dricus does, but it's going to bring him into close proximity against a naturally defensive guy. I wonder what that's going to mean. And then at range, dude, the guy jousts, he blitz, he has combinations, he switches stances through it. I mean, you saw this constantly in numerous fights. And sort of one more note about this too, BC. You saw this in the Trevin Giles fight with DDP. You saw this in the Till fight. You've seen this in a billion of his fights. DDP will often back up, sometimes all the way up against the fence line, and then you like sprint off the cage. It's actually how we stopped Trevin Giles because he covers so much distance so rapidly. Remember what happens when guys get their back up against the fence? Their opponent often swarms on them and gets closer, which brings them closer to the target. DDP actually kind of loves this. He likes to come shooting out of that space. So here's what I mean. Is it going to be the kind of deconstruction he had against Izzy? I just don't think so. He may still win. You may still see a lot of it, but he's dealing with a very different kind of fighter here. He's dealing with a very physical guy, a guy who takes much more risk, a guy who is younger, a guy who is more physical, more explosive. it's going to be just a different, if you're going to detonate, or excuse me, if you're going to, I should say, if you're going to defuse that bomb, it's a different process to do that than the one you got against Izzy. And I think it's a little bit more of a difficult one, style versus style.
Without question. This is going to be interesting. It's getting me fired up. Now for DDP, 30 years old, South Africa, 6-0 since making his UFC debut mid-pandemic there in 2020, 5 stoppages. But you mentioned that Darren Till fight, which was in December of 2022. That was his 4th of 6 fights. When I rewatched that, we mentioned it the other day on Morning Combat, it reminded me how still raw he was in so many categories. Did DDP, in your eyes, come full bloom against Robert Whittaker? I mean, was there anything you saw in the Derek Brunson win or anything else that would have prepared you that this quickly he and his team could round out that game and be able to use those sort of natural advantages, the size, the power, the aggressiveness? Luke, he was not this same technical fighter just 2 to 3 fights ago. Is it just learning on the job, learning quickly, and here we are? Or I mean, I guess I'm trying to ask you, is there any kind of fool's gold in what we saw against Robert Whittaker that now we expect DDP to be that Hulk against anybody?
Yeah, I don't think you stop Robert Whittaker by accident, personally speaking. No. Here's what gets people tripped up, and when I say people, I mean me too. If you just look at the way in which he moves, he obviously is a very good athlete, but he's got a really odd sort of mechanical way of moving. It doesn't look right. I mean, he has a very high guard, for example, which is fine, leaves himself open in certain ways. But he's got this weird kind of knock-kneed almost way of moving, like a baby giraffe. He's stable, but it doesn't look like the fluidity you might see from somebody else who is equally a good athlete, just who tends to have more balance underneath them. But that will deceive you. It will deceive you, because if you actually look at the way in which DDP fought Robert Whittaker, dude, he had his number. And not just because styles make fights, although that is true too, but because it was very obvious the way in which he approached this fight. He not only put his stamp on it, his marker, in the way in which he typically does, but they knew all of Robert Whittaker's tendencies, and they built in responses to it. So that to me is the sign of an experienced, very talented fighter. Can you fight your fight and win, which he did, while also accommodating the nuances of strategy that you need to take away what your opponent does? Can you, in other words, somehow stay inside your comfort zone while addressing for the very specific tactical challenges that are up against you? Yes, they can, and they did. So that's what really is. If you just sort of zoom out and you watch this guy move, you'll be like, how did he get here? But when you really see him actually put it together, it's not a mistake. It's not an accident. He didn't luck box his way here. He earned it. He just looks a little bit weird doing it.
He does, but he's durable. He's big. He's got that finishing power. And Luke, some of these are the things that Sean Strickland hasn't consistently shown, that plus level ability to finish guys on the feet or on the ground on the super elite level. Didn't matter against Adesanya because he was dominant and in control. I wonder if that matters in this matchup. It's something we got to see. But to focus on Sean Strickland for a second, I watched a bunch of his interviews. I watched the sit down with Megan O'Leary of the UFC that's getting a lot of traction. And look, it's hard to really understand exactly where his mind is at because he can be all over the place. In one breath, Luke, and I got to call him on CBS Sports about this, he's sort of this new, unique hero, superstar, in a sense that there's no doubt he connects with the audience. I mean, he is like, almost like, how can I say this respectfully? Like white trash prophet, right? Like almost like there's a conspiracy element to what he's putting out there, but he's also trying to send a message that like, we're in the Matrix. All of this is vain. So I set that up to say this, Luke. He's been outspoken from like a half hour after he won the title over Adesanya that he won't be defined by the belt. He claims it's under his in his closet under a pile of dirty clothes, right? Like that's what he's trying to present, that my life didn't change necessarily because I won one fight, right? Like I'm still that same guy. All this is BS. And Luke, if you look closely, he almost speaks matter-of-factly like he assumes this title reign won't last long. In fact, he told O'Leary that, you know, he just loves to train, spar, and fight. Everything else is BS. He doesn't enter fights nervous. He enters fights ready to kill. So is that an advantage, the way he so nonchalantly talks about pressure, anxiety, nerves, the feeling of, oh, I'm a champion, so now I've got to, you know, work extra hard to keep this belt? It's as if he doesn't give a damn about it. Is that a superpower that we're sort of overlooking entering this fight?
I think it probably. I don't know if we're overlooking it. I mean, here we are talking about it. But I do believe that that kind of mentality serves him well. You have seen, first of all, just getting a UFC title is very difficult, right? And he may lose this one too, and fairly. Maybe DDP is the better guy, maybe not. I guess we'll see. As you indicated, the odds are extremely close. It's a tough one to call, But I think Sean has never been about pretension. That I think this is the sort of thing you mentioned. You can say white trash prophet, and I don't think that's the worst way to describe it, but he sort of seems like everyman prophet. Now, I would say that someone who's got the views that he does in the real world should not be seen as prophetic, but I do recognize, BC, to the point that you're raising, he has a certain intolerance for polite society. He has a certain intolerance for the phoniness that comes with this, the phoniness that comes with expected routine that we're all supposed to be a part of. And he has a certain kind of happiness with ordinariness, so to speak, that people really respond to. For example, he did an interview with Alex Bahunin of MMA Mania, and you may have seen these, like humanizing fighters. And his answers were hilarious because it's all these things like favorite food, favorite drink, favorite video game, favorite movie. His favorite food was like hamburger. His favorite drink was water. And by the way, these are fine things to like. There's actually nothing wrong with that. But what I mean is, this is who this guy is. He likes to wear a white t-shirt, jeans, boots, drives an ordinary truck, lives for the most part, lives a reasonably ordinary life. You get the idea. I mean, he has an unusual occupation. But
look, to cut you off, he said, I train, I shoot guns, I go to sleep. He's like, that's my entire life. I don't go out to clubs. I don't do anything. Like, that's right. It.
He doesn't go out and party. He doesn't do all this crazy stuff in that sense. He just has a life absolutely, completely unencumbered by pretension. And I think people really, really do, in fact, respond to the genuine person they see in that particular regard. So that's powerful. Now, you're talking about what does that mean for competitive sake? Well, it sort of bleeds over into how he trains and how he looks at a fight. He doesn't look at it like, ooh, look at this title fight. Isn't this so grand? Other than to say he might get a bigger paycheck for it. He probably likes that part. And look at the way he trains and look at the way which he is received by his teammates. To sort of see him as a leader, a guy who helps other people, a guy who, first into the gym, last out kind of a thing. He doesn't want any special privileges. He doesn't want any special treatment. And also, he likes to get down in the dirt, so to speak. This is a guy who spars regularly. It's actually part of his pre-fight prep in a way that most other fighters probably don't do. I think this kind of thing, this bigger picture where I'm not putting this pomp and circumstance on myself or the process. I routinely spar. I'm routinely in the gym. I live in the gym. This is my craft. This is my hobby. This is frankly my life. I'm just going to bring that to fight night. It calms him, it centers him, and it gives him focus. Now, that's not to say, BC, when the lights are on and when the crowd is shouting, he won't have nerves or whatever else. Sure. He certainly may. But speaking to that process you're talking about, there's a bigger picture here. And once you understand that, it makes a little bit of sense in terms of how he competes and why.
Yeah, it's interesting. He did seem to show like an odd sign of sort of peeling back the label in that last round against Adesanya, where he knew he was winning. He knew he was on his way to victory. Yet he's sort of letting out all this anger and sort of built up rage over the years. He's screaming into Adesanya's face. It's like that was sort of him showing a little bit behind the curtain. But then, like I said, a half hour later at the press conference, he's like, yeah, who cares? It's just a title. Some of that is show, but I think that's also a helpful part of how he navigates this. But one thing he always says in every interview, which is true, and you touched on it, is he claims he's the hardest worker there is, that there's nobody that puts more craft into his game. That certainly helps his gas tank. That certainly helps with all the sparring he does, his willingness to get into crazy fights if he has to, or maybe more importantly, be in the pocket, be in range, but not always be there to be hit, because that was the frustration that he brought upon Adesanya with that. So I'm trying to figure it out, to be fair, Luke, on both fighters. I asked you that question earlier. Was there any element of the Robert Whittaker upset from DDP that could be fool's gold, or we're overrating it because it was style-induced or the perfect fight? I'm wondering that, of course, about Strickland too, because yeah, he blew away Abus Magomedov, but when we had previously seen him step up to a high level, think the Poatan fight, he didn't put his best effort forward. It looked like he was a little too reckless and sort of got caught for it. I believe that he is so well focused and fit and ready, but I can't figure out if he can do again what he did to Adesanya against another elite foe, Luke, because he didn't show that throughout his career. He's always been good to very good, but never great. Against Adesanya, he was great. Is he a great fighter yet? Right now, I don't know. I don't even know if DDP is a great fighter. What I do know is it's a perfect matchup because we're going to find out. But I think each guy still has some level of, okay, we saw that once. Now we got to see that again.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, okay, you got your Robert Whittaker win. Hey, none of us saw that coming, but you got it fair and square, and here you are. Same with Sean. Not many people saw him ahead of time beating Izzy, but he sure enough did, and here they are. But okay, how much can you scale that? Who is actually coming? Who is actually going? The point you raised, I think you said it 1,000% correct. We know that they have ability. That part to is not some big mystery. They didn't just, CM Punk their way through to this process. But are they the next one to transcend? Are they the next one to put their stamp on the division, either with a defense in Sean's case or capturing the title in Dricus's one? Look at the odds again, minus 100 plus and 100, with some change in either direction. It's very, very difficult to tell because we simply don't know enough about each guy at this level of opponent. We don't know about, they haven't had this many. Now, Darren Till was a good fighter, but not at this level of opponent. Derek Brunson, good fighter, not at this level. And Trevin Giles and some of the other ones that he beat, not close to this level. In the case of Sean Strickland, I mean, we even said, when we were evaluating him for Fighter of the Year, hey, some of these wins, the Abus Magomedov win, this is not exactly against elite opposition that puts you into this position. So how much can you really take from it? Of course, he did really well against Izzy, but that's a very small sample size against the very, very elite in terms of his middleweight campaign. Obviously, he started at 170 before that. So there's just a lot of unknowns. That's what makes this fight kind of interesting and kind of great, among other reasons. There's just a lot of unknown. We actually we have two senior fighters, or two, I should say, established fighters, might be a better way to put it. And yet, for what they present at this level in terms of turning over the division, we just don't know a whole lot about them. We knew a lot about Izzy, at least we thought we did, and we certainly still do. We just don't know as much about these guys at the elite level. We're going to find out more on Saturday.
All right, before we find out which way you might be leaning in this virtual pick'em fight, you mentioned Izzy, and I think we should mention him only because in some form his name still looms large over this matchup in the division in general, even though after that surprising loss to Strickland, he did tease the idea of going away for a while, maybe even a year or two, and sort of just taking a break. Well, I do feel like that's changed. We've seen him in interviews talking about that he feels like he can start training again in February. Luke, there had been some reports that he might be cage side in Toronto on Saturday. I have not found full confirmation on that yet. If he is, are we looking at a possibility heading into UFC 300 in April that Izzy could fight the winner? Do you expect Izzy to enter the cage to face off against the winner? Is that the direction we seem to be going here as a promotion?
Could be. And what I had even said was Izzy shouldn't get an immediate rematch to Sean Strickland, and he's not. So obviously it's DDP who's getting the first shot at Strickland, which is exactly how it should be. But I wouldn't mind if they actually subbed him back in, considering one more time, he is at worst the second best middleweight of all time behind the great Anderson Silva. That's not some kind of insane place to be. And you can make it work either way. Obviously it'd be a rematch in the case of Strickland, which I think would be hotly anticipated, or in the case of DDP, it'd be a fresh matchup, that's had some bad blood. I'll leave it at that. We all know about the sort of discourse they had back and forth in the way that they
talking about
did.
finding out who the real African champion is? Is that what you're trying to
lots of N-words being thrown, and it wasn't the white guy saying them. So, there's a lot of interesting results there. But you get what I'm saying. Either way, it makes it work. Let's cross that bridge when we get there, and we can make some assessments about who it is. But yes, part of what has to happen is Sean beating Izzy was great, but it feels like for the division to fully move on, either he has to go to 205 Izzy, or there has to be some other way in which a second Strickland fight or the DDP fight happens. And should he lose there's this permanent we've moved on at that point. They're not quite across that threshold, although they're obviously very close. Izzy doesn't have a whole lot of time left in the fight game.
Well, I love this division. I love this fight. I'd love if Izzy fought the winner. I love Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa, which is coming up. I love the Bo Nichols, the Hamzats, the Joe Pfeiffers that are on their way up. Middleweight is red hot. I think this fight is the right fight at the right time. And like we just sort of teased, I do think there is UFC 300 potential for the winner if they're healthy and things go their way. We're going to find out. Let's find out who wins this. Luke, if I was going on vibes alone and I was looking at the totality of the two upset wins, the one by DDP against Whittaker, and of course the Strickland against Adesanya, I'd kind of tell you I'm leaning DDP here. More options to finish. more physical, more destructive, could be losing certain stretches of this fight, but maybe have more of a chance to turn it around. That's not crazy in a pick'em fight, but if that was the stance somebody came up to you, how would you counter that in trying to say Strickland should be the one getting his hand raised?
I'm not sure he should. I have really gone back and forth on this one, and folks might accuse me of bias, but I should warn them. I've been wrong about both of these guys.
Yeah,
like
sure.
I've been wrong about DDP and I've been wrong about Strickland. In fact, the last two breakdowns I did on both of them were both like, hey guys, sorry, I got those wrong. So usually when I get a guy wrong so often and then they have a fresh matchup, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt and then pick them, but I don't know which way to go because I'm trapped either way in this particular case. I would say this. I think your general sentiment is probably correct. The way in which he moves, the way in which he kind of approaches things seems both very physical, DDP, but also very strangely not normal motion, not normal mechanical use of the way in which you typically understand strikers or grapplers to do that. But at the same time, he is very, very effective when he gets to the ground. And by the way, again, he's usually good for 3 takedowns almost per 15 minutes. He passes to mount right away. Think about how many times you've seen him in mount or the back. He does it all the time. It really is a sort of consistent.
I still don't believe it happened. He went full mount instantly.
And did it to Till. Yeah, and did it to Till and did it to a bunch of other guys. He does it all the time. And so it just sort of tells you this guy is always hunting offense. He is always trying to just beat down the door. He's the SWAT team. That's really who he is. Whereas Sean Strickland's a little bit more of like a very cunning sniper. They're two different kinds of battle, two different kinds of warfare. I just feel like in MMA, which relative to boxing is a little bit more offense-oriented, where guys with a little bit more gusto for offense tend to do a little bit better, at least at the sub-elite levels. That's definitely true. It's less true at the elite levels, which is exactly what this is. Nevertheless, I lean DDP because I just feel like while there are real flaws that I think a guy like Sean can absolutely exploit, hardly out of the question, I just feel like he's going to knock on the door too many times in too many different ways. Now, that gets complicated if he actually can't get the takedown. Then it becomes Sean's fight to lose, if you ask me. But DDP has a lot of tricks, a lot of explosivity, a lot of ways in which he can lull you into false confidence. And I'm going to say it one more time. Pay attention very closely. If you see DDP with his back against the fence, you might think, oh, this is really bad for him. He comes out of that position shot out of a cannon and has won fights like that multiple times. I just feel like it's a little too much firepower, however flawed it might be for DDP. We shall see.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we can see a stoppage here for either guy. I don't know if we have a 5-round war. I don't know if we have a technical battle. We got to find out. I am leaning DDP. Do you think there's a bigger fight of the two if Izzy was going to face the winner? And even let's say it's 300, UFC 300, because Sean Strickland is becoming his own star. Like he truly is becoming a cult figure.
It probably is Strickland, right? It probably is Strickland. Because if he beats Izzy, then he beats DDP, and then he rematches Izzy, that's very big. That's a really big moment in time in the middleweight division's history, which isn't to say it wouldn't be big with DDP in a different kind of way, but that's a fresh matchup, and while that's usually more interesting, the enormity, the history, the performance that guy had was so memorable that trying to do that again is going to obviously have that as a reference point and build it all up together, whereas you don't have that with DDP. But I do, again, dude, you're playing with if you're the UFC, you're playing with house money really in either direction. It doesn't matter who wins,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not the same thing. Not the same thing about this co-main event. The women's bantamweight vacant titles at stake. Amanda Nunes, the greatest female fighter of all time, mostly a universal acclaim, although you certainly can love Cyborg in this one, gave up her 2 titles in the best way possible when she defeated Irene Aldana. I believe it was last June, walked away on top. We don't know what's going on at women's featherweight. I'm not even sure the UFC does, but it took a while to get the women's bantamweight title fight announced. I thought they'd bring up Shevchenko, but she got caught up in the Grasso rivalry at 125. I thought we would bring in Juliana Pena, but she seems to be perpetually injured. I even thought they'd go crazy with the likes of a Rousey, Tate, Holm, and really just try to inject history or star power. They didn't do that either, Luke. They went Mayra Bueno Silva against Raquel Pennington. So, let's be real blunt here. In my opinion, the worst title fight in UFC history in terms of in terms of status, in terms of stakes, in terms of everything, I always said it was the Ultimate Fighter Championship in the inaugural Women's 125, where they rolled out Nico Montagna, who upset her way through the bracket in that reality show to get there, but they did it against late replacement due to an injury, Roxanne Modafferi. It's one of the rightfully so, most forgotten 5-round title fights. Montagna was stripped ahead of her, what would have been her first title defense against Valentina Shevchenko for, what was it, missing weight, Luke, or having a weight scare and not being able to perform?
She had a number of issues prior to even getting to the contest, yeah.
To me, and maybe it's added in that it was a reality show final. You add in that it was Montana, who unfortunately, not really her fault, but she's much maligned now all these years later and disappeared. Luke, is this title fight better or worse than that? If I'm holding that fight as really the lowest you can, the rock bottom moment you can get.
That one's pretty bad. I mean, I don't think it's bad, but what I'm about to say, but also it doesn't probably hold up to UFC history. Gil Castillo and Dave Monet. Do you remember that contest, BC?
I don't. So that's probably a great
Monet
point.
Winning that one. Yeah.
Wasn't Cabbage Correa in a heavyweight title fight too? I mean, we've had some bad ones at certain points, right?
Did Cabbage fight Tim Sylvia when Tim was? I know they fought in Super Brawl. I don't remember, but to your point, that's the company it's keeping. I mean, I don't want to listen. I will say this. I will say this for Rocky Pennington. First of all, Amanda Nunes just laid waste to this division, right? We always talk about what's the best way for a division turnover to happen if you're the UFC, or frankly, even the fans in general, or the next contender up. It's for the next contender up to beat like an aging champion who already, had all their magic. The road comes to a close. They lose to the next contender. There's this clean handoff, and then the new era begins. The problem was Amanda Nunes beat the shit out of everyone for as long as she was around, except for Juliana Pena, and then she got the rematch win there. So she just flattened this entire division, then retired and had to give back the belt, man. Like, if you have to give back the belt, your peers couldn't do shit to you. This is really the reality that we're living in at this point. I mean, there's other bigger issues, I think, in women's MMA more generally, and in this division specifically, but one of the biggest ones has to be that Amanda Nunes just kind of killed interest in this division a little bit. Now, you add on top of that, I want to say one good thing. I mean, there's many good things you could say about Rocky Pennington, but I do think it's important to say one thing. When she fought Amanda Nunes, you might recall that at the end of the 4th round, she told her corner she didn't want to go back out, and they kind of cajoled her into going back out, in which case she got stopped right afterwards. There was a lot of controversy about that. And I think when she went out for the 5th, that's when she got her nose or face broken by Amanda Nunes. It was just a disaster. It shouldn't have happened. And there was a lot of concern, including from people like me, about what long-term effect that would have on her. Now, again, as I just said, were it not for Amanda Nunes' absence, this fight would not be happening. But lo and behold, here Rocky Pennington is many years later in a title fight that, she's been put together a pretty good win streak. Her turnaround's been, I think, somewhat unheralded and a little bit more remarkable than we're giving it credit. That was a pretty bad low point for her, although it was a title fight. And for her to turn it around and be in this place is pretty exceptional. I do think it deserves to be noted in that way.
Well, I mean, it is, Luke, and I'm not trying to be unfair. She's 35 years old. She's got the longest winning streak in the division. She's got 5 in a row. Like, it looks really good. And that dates back to that close loss in her rematch to Holly Holm in 2020 that she lost. She had defeated Aldana, by the way, by split decision before that. So, but Luke, it's like, let's look at the quality of the wins, though. That's the real problem. There's
some of them are quality.
No depth in this division. Maybe you can argue opening up a 125-pound division took away possibilities of names, but it's like decision Marion Renault, decision against Pani Kianzad, submitted Macy Chazon, decision over Aspen Ladd.
That's not nothing. Submitting Macy Chazon is not nothing.
I know, either is the Aspen Ladd win at that time, and neither and so that Chazon one, by the way, was at featherweight. But Ketlin Vieira by split decision, not an awful win either. But there's not a win in there that you're like, yeah.
She didn't stamp her ticket with like for example, we just talked about the main event. It wasn't a stoppage, but the historic nature, frankly, of what Sean Strickland was able to do against Izzy, that he put a stamp of authority on it and then won the title in the process. Dricus Du Plessis stopping the former champion, the class of the division in certain ways, in Robert Whittaker. That's authoritative. This one just feels like she accumulated enough wins where they had really no other choice but to put her in this position. It wasn't, to your point, putting a stamp on the division in the same kind of way. Totally fair, totally fair. But she does have the wins by hook or by crook. She has a lot of experience, and she does have a fair amount of well-rounded ability. It's just there's nothing in either particular case that's a remarkable talent that either one has. They don't have a remarkable, although the Holly Holm win was nice by Silva, although it ended up in controversy due to the nature of the USADA
that's
violation.
the only thing that's close. That's the only win that's close here. And like you said, it's drowned out a bit in controversy. Gets a submission win.
I would say Silva's win over Landsberg as well, the knee bar, was pretty nice on top of that.
Nice-ish. I mean, my point is I'm not here to be a hater. It's just that this division is lacking so much depth that it probably shouldn't be a division. Would that be different if Juliana Pena was active, healthy, and on her own win streak and in this fight? It might be. Same thing if the ageless wonder Holly Holm had beaten Bueno Silva. Would that inject some level of history and name power? Yes, it would. They got nothing here, Luke. And maybe they go out and put on a great fight. And, if it maybe, imagine Silva gets a stoppage here because Pennington doesn't get stopped easy, right? It's the Nunes one. It's a submission, an Invicta to Katzenganu 12 years ago. Outside of that, you got to say Pennington's durable. That's one of her.
She's tough as nails.
One of her most consistent skills. But man, we have potential for this to be a long, average fight. It just happens to be a title in stake. So it's like, should you have created a women's heavyweight division? Should you have waited for Juliana Pena to get healthy? I think you can question that. I really think you can in this case. You know what I mean? This is a flat tire as a pay-per-view co-main event. There's no other way to say it. There's no other way to say it.
Here's the problem. It's like any fight that you put on a card, if you're a matchmaker, yeah, of course, if you put Justin Gaethje on there, chances are it's going to be pretty good. But the reality is, there's only so much pre-event engineering a matchmaker can do. Right? They can only put it together as best they can to see what you're going to get. And so even in the best of circumstances, it's a bit of a roll of the dice. The problem with this one is there's just not a lot of circumstances where this one is exciting. You could get a finish, and particularly in the case of Silva, who does, as I mentioned, have some decent submissions, right? She has good submissions, by the way, from the clinch with that guillotine, the power guillotine that she got on Holly Holm and the knee bar she rolled underneath with. She's got some finishing ability there, which is kind of interesting, which breathes a little bit of life into this. But neither is a dynamic striker. Neither is a dynamic finisher more generally. Neither is a dynamic athlete. Neither is a dynamic puncher. Neither is a dynamic kickboxer. Neither is a dynamic, cardio machine or output machine. They're both respectable in their well-roundedness. They're both respectable in terms of the overall experience, particularly Raquel Pennington. This is, of course, her second UFC title fight. There's a lot to respect about it, but there's nothing dynamic about it that jumps off the page. And the matchup itself is probably going to be a clinch fest, BC, because when you look at Raquel Pennington does her best work in the clinch, and Silva has some takedowns, but some of the best ones of those come from the clinch itself, which means there's going to be a lot of jockeying for position there that may not necessarily go anywhere. It's set for 5 rounds. There's just a lot of ways this could end up being not just a dud on paper, but a dud for the crowd as well. It's just not a great fight. It's not.
If Aldana had lost to Amanda Nunes in a more competitive fashion, right? We rightfully criticized her for really not letting the hands go enough, and it was just a bad night for Aldana in her title fight. If she had maybe not lost as wide, and if Juliana Pena had been healthy, that's not a bad matchup at all, Luke, right? Not at all, but this ain't it. This ain't the one. As we look at the FanDuel odds, it's certainly close on paper as we have Mayra Bueno Silva as your slight favorite, minus 184, plus 142 for Pennington. In terms of the fight, I agree with you. I just think Silva has more ways to win, is a little bit more dynamic, and as sturdy and steady as Raquel Pennington is, you rarely, if ever, and certainly not at the super elite level, see her come over the top with a plus performance that you didn't see coming or a finish that you didn't see coming. So, Luke, I feel like unless Silva gets a submission here, we're probably going the distance in a clinch fest. Probably Silva wins, but that's not the question I have for you. Before he left Yahoo Sports, and now he's going to start his own app and website, KevinIole.com. Shout out to Kev. But Luke, he did have inexplicably Juliana Pena as his pound for pound number 1 on the female side the last time he did that in December. Will that change after this fight or not on the Kevin Iole women's pound for pound list?
I don't know. That's a weird one to have as number 1. I don't quite understand.
How do you have her get above Whaley or like 15 other people? You have Pena as number one pound for pound. What the hell's going on here?
I don't quite get that one, to be honest with you. But yeah, I mean, listen, if neither of these women are champion and one of them becomes champion, it's going to adjust their rankings. But this is the other problem with this fight, BC. Like we talked about these two guys in the main event, not just having an interesting style clash, but then, brawling in the crowd. That doesn't do much for me, but it certainly does with the casual audience or, otherwise interested observers. There's nothing between these two. There's no storyline. There's no rivalry. There's no past. There's just a present. And when you add that the style contrast doesn't necessarily lead to a dynamic fight either, there's just nothing to go on here other than, yes, do I have respect for Silva's career? Of course. Do I have respect for Pennington's career and what she's accomplished? Started off the conversation this way. But beyond that, like, what is really grabbing you about this fight? Nothing is grabbing.
We got to move on. Yeah. I mean, maybe you could have told Team Silva here, make a run at Tisha. Just disrespect her left and right. Get people interested in this fight, Luke. Okay, you know what I'm saying, right?
Just do the whole Ian Gary thing where you just insult everyone else's family member, right? Do that bit.
I hate it. If you're wondering, though, Pennington ranked number 2 behind Juliana Pena and Silva number 3. So here we are, for better or for worse. It is a title fight. We'll see it. Look, let's move on down this card. You're going to get a bunch of Canadians on this card, but no Canadian, I think, has the potential to jump through your screen more than hulking welterweight Mike Malott, who's unbeaten in his brief UFC run. But Luke, doing a little bit more research, you find out Malott, starting in 2017, took off nearly 4 years of activity in the sport to focus on his grappling, and he's come back a hulking submission threat. What makes this matchup interesting against Neil Magny is Magny at 36 is still in the role he's been at seemingly for almost a decade. He is that elite gatekeeper that has split wins and losses in his last 6 fights, only loses to the super, Shavkat level type guys, it seems. So this is going to be that litmus test for Mike Malott. So first and foremost, Luke, he got a huge pop in Vancouver last year. I expect the same here in Toronto. How good is 32-year-old Mike Malott entering what is expected to be his toughest fight to date on paper?
I think he's pretty good. I mean, this is one of the first bigger tests that this is really the first name opponent that he'll have faced, and or if he gets the win, beaten. I think it's a great test for him. I have to tell you, the tape on Malott looks good, including more recently, right? He really is very, very dynamic. Obviously, he has fought guys in both open and closed stances. In his last fight, he did from an open stance, and he looked phenomenal. He takes his time to get into range, but when he does, he's not shy about letting go. So you like his activity, you like his accuracy. He puts feints and then combinations together well. Very, very strong, as you indicated. Very authoritative takedowns from the body lock against the fence, out in open space. And then just like Dricus, not the same way, but in the same kind of mindset, once you go to the floor, he doesn't wait to go to the floor and then go, okay, well, now that I'm here, I guess I should pass. It's right away. He's passing, or he's landing inside control in the takedown itself and then moving to mount or whatever the case. Like he's action-oriented with what he is doing, and he can put punches and submissions together very, very quickly. I mean, look at his last fight against, I think Adam Fugit is his last name. It looks like Fugit, but
yeah, Fugit.
Just fuck it. But here's what happens. Remember, he switch stanced into a right hook, dropped him, and then the intervening process sat for a guillotine, didn't fully get it, then went to mounted guillotine on the roll, and then got the submission right away. That's the Mike Malott experience. He took his time to get to the place he wanted to get to. By the way, hurt his opponent with a body kick early on in the fight. You saw him go after it. He is not afraid to throw, but still calculated enough to pick the right shots for the right circumstance and then chain different phases of offense together. In particular, as you indicated, the submission hunting, the submission prowess has gone through the roof in my experience. He's 32 years old, so he's probably entering his prime. Neil Magny, I think, is just 6 or 7 months away from being 37, which is very, very old for this division. Although the one factor to pay attention to here, BC, that will be very, very different, 7-inch reach advantage, 80 inches to 73 inches in favor of Neil Magny. I think to what extent he navigates that space, Mike Malott, that will determine whether he wins or loses.
Yeah, since Mike Malott returned to the sport in late 2020, he is 5-0 All 5 were stoppages, 4 of them by submission. The only knockout win was against Mickey Gall in April of 2022, which did serve as his official UFC debut after winning on the Contender Series. Certainly somebody to watch here. And as we look at the odds closing in on this featured fight, FanDuel has minus 340. Mike Malott is your betting favorite. Neil Magny plus 250. Luke, we know what we get from Neil Magny. He can take you deep. It's hard to pick apart offensively and look great against. He can wrestle. He can do a lot of different things. Is there one aspect you think he should focus on to try to expose that lack of experience we're talking about from Malott? You may be surprised looking up and down Malott's Wikipedia. He fought in Bellator once and took a draw. He has a loss in World Series of Fighting, but that was back like 10 years ago, literally. Right. So where should Magny focus to try to pull the upset here?
I think that jab. I think if Mike Malott is really able to get on the inside and get to the body lock or get to the hips or the shoulders, frankly, of a guy like Neil Magny, I think it's going to be real trouble for him. Once he gets on top, he is going to be absolutely working him like a summer job. I really believe that. And, of course, we saw what Ian Gary was able to do at distance. It's not like that's necessarily all safe territory for Neil Magny, but Ian Gary, Mike Malott have very different kinds of games and body types and everything else. So I really think that Mike Malott's going to want to get on the inside of that. He's going to really want to close the distance and then work either his boxing to the inside or body locks on the inside. If I'm Neil Magny, I want to stay off my back for sure. I want to keep my back off the fence. And I think all of that goes down to you've got a 7-inch reach advantage on the feet. My guy, you have to use that. You 1,000,000,000% have to use that. And by the way, Neil Magny knows, at least has some experience trying to do that. And, of course, has a good jab, has a respectable jab. So it's a doable path for Neil Magny. I think he's up against it. I like Mike Malott to win here. In fact, I do think he's going to win pretty convincingly by the time it's all said and done. However, Neil Magny, while long in the tooth, crafty, and does have a good jab.
There it is. An interesting welterweight tilt as we see some turnover in this division. Magny entering ranked 13th. Mike Malott unranked entering this matchup. You would believe that would change with a big win here. Staying on this pay-per-view main card, another Canadian, Marc-Andre Barriault, will enter a middleweight tilt against Chris Curtis. Luke, do we have any meaning here? What are we looking for in this matchup?
Chris Curtis, I think, is a little bit older than folks might realize. What is he, 35, 36, I believe?
36,
I think he's, yeah. So, he's got great boxing. Like, he's got some of the most fun. It's funny. They talk about Sean Strickland having adapted the Philly shell to MMA or some version of it. Obviously, the MMA version is a little square, and it's kind of like versus the boxing one, which is going to be much more bladed. But in general, there's some truth to that, certainly. I also feel like the adapted boxing style for MMA of Chris Curtis has been one of the more unheralded things. But remember, he had bad luck against Kelvin Gastelum when their heads clashed, and he got knocked out, and then he just had to come to and then fight out of a deficit and basically did too late and then lost that contest. And, it's been some issues for him. And then, of course, it was the no contest in the Imavov fight. So there's just a lot of things where he hasn't been able to get right more recently since the Joaquin Buckley win. But it sort of shows you, man, when guys try to duel with him in the boxing realm, a lot of times it takes a little bit of time to get adjusted. But once he does, he puts it together really well. Remember, he stopped Brendan Allen as well, I believe. So in this particular case, a guy like Barriault, a little bit less of a reach, a little bit younger than him. He is kind of one of these go for broke types. Listen to his strikes landed per minute, 5.95, strikes absorbed, 5.25. High on both accounts. He still has a positive differential, but if you're eating nearly 6 strikes a minute, that's a lot for the UFC. You typically don't see that very much. Takedown accuracy, just 25%, so he doesn't have a super high rate. Takedown defense, 67%, doesn't go for submissions, gets about 0.24 takedowns per 15 minutes. He's kind of in these spots where you don't get a real clear signature of where the achievement lies other than through activity, whereas I feel like Chris Curtis, a little bit more pinpoint, a little bit more accurate, but in the case of Barriault, he's riding 2 wins in a row, right? So he kind of earned this spot where they're meeting in this way. Curtis has been kind of on the decline or having some difficulty with the situations he's been in. Barriault kind of rising to the occasion. They're meeting here on this pay-per-view. I just feel like Chris Curtis has beaten much better guys than Barriault. The question is what he's got left at 35, 36 years old,
He does come in as the betting favorite, but it is a virtual pick'em, as are 4 of the 5 main card fights. So whatever this card lacks in, crossover star power outside of that main event, or really value outside of that co-main event, you certainly get some closely matched fights. Curtis minus 188, according to FanDuel, plus 146 over to Barriault as your slight underdog. But Luke, what is expected to be the pay-per-view opener, Is a hell of a fight in the featherweight division. Unbeaten Movsar Evloev will welcome Arnold Allen, who's fresh off of last year's oh so close 5-round decision loss to Max Holloway. That, maybe if Allen had started a little bit earlier, you wonder if that fight could have been a little bit different, because when he did put the gas on in round 5, he had moments. And I think at the very least, Luke, for a loss for Allen that snapped a 12-fight win streak that started before he even entered the UFC, I think it's a moral victory in a lot of ways, because what he did prove is that he belongs in this elite category. So one thing I've been saying, although Arnold Allen, unfortunately, Luke, injuries, delays, man, he seems to only be able to fight like once a year consistently. But one thing I said coming out of that Max fight is expect his next opponent to get some offensively, because I do think he will have learned from it. But Luke, his next opponent is on fire right now when you consider that Evloev, the 29-year-old from Russia, is 17-0 and has won all 6 of his UFC appearances, albeit all 6 by decision. I love this fight. Is there any reason to have any pretension, though, entering this one to kick off the pay-per-view portion?
Well, here's what I would say. We talked about like what matchmakers can do to engineer fights. Sometimes they make great fights and they don't necessarily engineer them for maximum excitement. They engineer them for what the division needs, who's available, or just for sort of intriguing battles about what kinds of guys can solve what kinds of problems. That's what this fight feels like to me. I don't think this is going to be a barn burner, and yet, if you look at the hardcore fight fans, they're very, very excited about this fight. They're not expecting a barn burner. It's not for the BMF title, right? This is the kind of opposite sort of fight. This is going to be a very, very strategic fight. Movsar Evloev, as you indicated, just one of these guys who has phenomenal athletic ability and also suffocating takedowns, suffocating ground and pound, really, really has not in any way suffered defeat that in its professional MMA contest. Arnold Allen, been tested against better guys, came up a little bit short, but seems to still be getting better and very, very well-rounded, very tough. We got to sit down with him in London when we visited earlier last year.
Mowgli.
Mowgli. Yeah, that's right.
Mowgli.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what they call him.
Shouts to Pacers Gym. You can just lift weights in the backyard and do drugs. Or steroids. It's great. But BC, if I may, I really believe this one is relatively simple to understand. It would be very surprising to me if this fight was nothing but on the feet and Allen lost. Possible, but unlikely. He does seem to me to be the better of the two on the feet to the extent he throws, although he's not a very active thrower in the sense that we typically discuss. However, he does have very good takedown defense. 76% overall, which is not super high, but listen to this. Here's what's kind of interesting, right? You would imagine if Evloev is going to win this, he's got to get the takedown. Okay, so what has recent history shown us? Since 2020, basically starting in 2021, the 4 opponents that Arnold Allen has had, which I believe were Yusuf, Holloway, Cater, and I forget the other
Dan
one. Hooker. They collectively only attempted 1 takedown, which was from Yusuf, and it failed. So he hasn't even had to worry about takedown attempts in that way at all. In that same amount of time, starting in 2021, against his opponents, Evloev has scored 24 takedowns collectively. In 2 different fights, he scored 9, right? Just an absolute takedown machine. But here's the catch. They have a common opponent. Arnold Allen fought him in 2020. Evloev fought him in 2021 in Nick Lentz. Nick Lentz went 0 for 9 against Arnold Allen in takedowns. He went 1 for 5 against Evloev. Both Evloev and Arnold Allen beat him. So to me, I don't really know what's going to happen with the takedown defense with Arnold Allen. I think it will be very, very hard to come by. I do believe that. The question for Arnold Allen is, one, is he going to stop the takedown? And he'll stop most of them. The question is, can he stop all of them? Or does he spend so much time defensively trying to answer for the takedown that his entire offense gets muted and there's a sort of grinding decision by the Russian in the end? This is, to me, where the fight is 1,000% going to be won or lost in either case.
Very interesting. The almighty one, Arnold Allen, will get a slight underdog push entering in here, plus 142, according to FanDuel, to the minus 184 unbeaten Evloev. Luke, I'm not here to ask you who's going to win this fight, because first I want to ask you, do you have a feeling on which guy is more likely to win a championship in this division?
We've thought it was Arnold Allen, but to the extent he's been tested, we He's come up just a little bit short. And so some of my enthusiasm for his chances, I mean, here's what I know. I know he can give the best fighters a very tough fight. Can he beat them? I don't know. I don't think so.
So you didn't come out of that Max fight saying, you know what, on a different night with maybe more output, or like, I felt like he was realizing, meaning Allen, in the moment that he was on that level. Did you come away saying, no, he's not on that level? Not only did he lose, he still got more to come to.
I think he's very close to the level, but he has to put himself over before I'll believe it.
Okay.
Again, he's very, very close. He's very close. Like, what's separating him is not much. But again, at the elite level, what separates some of these guys sometimes? Not very much, but there can be a big difference in the realities about what you get from that. So again, Arnold, more experience against better competition, more well-rounded. Also, one thing to note, Arnold Allen is a southpaw and has to fight a lot of orthodox opponents as a consequence. So he is used to open stance. I went and looked at, I'm not exactly sure how far back it goes, but for the last 4 or 5 of these that Evloev has had, it's been all other orthodox opponents. So you're going to be in open stance with their lead legs forward, mirroring one another. To what extent does that change the takedown ratio? To what extent does that change the entries? Easier to grab a leg in that case, but obviously Arnold Allen has tons of experience against guys in that particular dimension, in that southpaw versus orthodox setup. Evloev does not. Another factor to pay attention to when this gets going.
Arnold Allen comes in ranked number 4 in the featherweight division. Evloev number 9. But Luke, they still have Ortega at 3, and I love me some Brian Ortega, but that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you want to bang him. You want to bang him.
Well, by proxy, maybe I want to. No, I wouldn't even say that. Look, I wouldn't even put it out loud, but you know what I mean? I'd like to hear about his consequences, I'd like to hear more, Luke. Okay, I don't necessarily want him. It's more just, that got weird. What happened was we were doing a show. You said a comment and it got a little bit weird, but we can definitely rotate away from there. Quickly on Evloev, why do we not talk about him more? Is it because he wins decisions?
Yeah, and also his last fight against Diego Lopez, he sort of got through with the skin of his teeth. In fact, the guy who made a name for himself coming out of it was Diego Lopez, not Movsar Evloev, even though he won. So he's got a good style. Obviously, he's got a very difficult style to deal with. It's smothering, but one of these guys who also, he looks good getting off the bus, right? He's well-muscled, he wins, he's undefeated, but he doesn't have that. I mean, people always forget, dude, Khabib had like a thrashing style on top. He was absolutely beating you up. He was looking for submissions. He was hunting, for the most part. That's just not this guy's style. He doesn't have the same level of violence attached to his suffocating control. And for that reason, there's a little bit of less interest in him long term.
Well, look, there's a violent Canadian on the preliminary portion of the card. His name is Charles Jourdain, the featherweight who will take on Sean Woodson. Do you have any comments about this tweet, though, this week from Charles Jourdain that said, for this fight, I'm at a disadvantage because of the reach. I will use the same strategy I use with my stepsister. Penetrate and dominate.
Yeah. I mean, MMA, except for the fights themselves, everything about MMA sucks. So that's what I would say.
Do you need more information about the relationship, or you're just done with that topic already?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good on that. I don't need much more. I mean, this is a weird sort of Pornhub story come to life. I'm quite all right. Thanks.
Okay. Brad Katana.
Between that and the Tyron Woodley tape a couple weeks ago, I'm really scarred for life, if I could be honest with you.
Yeah. Brad Katona, against Garrett Armfield at bantamweight in the preliminary featured bout. There's other things to talk about, Luke. I just don't know if you care about them. Jasmine Jasdavicius, also
That's
Canadian,
a good one. Yep.
Will be in there against Priscilla Cachoeira in women's flyweight on the early prelims. So I'll be watching that one. Do you care about any other fights here? No, you don't.
The Julian Robertson, Polyana Viana one could be a fun kind of submission battle. It's worth paying attention, seeing how that one goes. But I think you pointed out correctly, the Jasmine Jasdavicius, Priscilla Cachoeira fight. That's going to be kind of fun. 34 versus 35. Obviously, Jasdavicius coming off of a loss in her last contest, but a very spirited one. Not a submission threat, but kind of in your face, sort of more than a grinder, kind of like a, she'll stand and bang with you a little bit, but that's exactly what Priscilla Cachoeira likes. She's actually been submitted a couple times, which is not Jasdavicius's forte. So this one's going to be an action fight. I think Jasdavicius is going to be fighting a little bit uphill, but she'll have the Canadian crowd on her side. Could be fun.
It's all going to go down Saturday night, Toronto, UFC 279, the first pay-per-view of the new year. And don't forget, Luke Thomas live immediately after on the Morning Combat channel, youtube.com/Morning Combat. I'll be doing the same on CBS Sports HQ. You can go to the CBS Sports HQ YouTube channel for my extended breakdowns as well. Luke, I wanted to close with this because we are undergoing a little bit of a slowdown as we construction behind the scenes of MK. And boy, are we going to come back in March and we're going to bang. But before that, we're going to have, of course, much more announcements. But we're going to be back live on Monday. We're going to have one show a week live. The rest of the month, you're going to be seeing us other ways. But news that broke through over the last couple of days, I just wanted to get your take on this. UFC was supposed to be in Saudi Arabia on March 2nd for its first appearance ever. It was going to be a fight night card that Dana was teasing would have more of a pay-per-view feel. According to multiple reports, I believe Ariel Helwani was the first, but Aaron Bronstetter as well. The company was told by Saudi Arabia that that's an unacceptable first offering and that they want essentially a pay-per-view in June. Ariel, connecting the dots, believes that when Islam Makhachev tweeted out his 3-fight plan, which included Justin Gaethje in June in a title defense, that Ariel believes they're talking about Saudi Arabia. Considering that Saudi Arabia is announcing boxing fights left and right, they're going to do a Frank Warren versus Eddie Hearn, 5 fighters versus 5 fighters. There's all those other heavyweight fights we talked about. The Turk, what's the guy's name? Turkey
Alal Sheikh. I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
Yeah, I'm trying not to call him His Excellency like everybody else, Luke.
Yeah, I'm not calling him His Excellency. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but I'm not doing that.
He's trying to make Bivol versus Better Beef in boxing. He's also just announced that PFL versus Bellator champion versus champion card, which, by the way, is pretty damn badass and creative. What do you make, though, of them saying, hey, UFC, it might work this weekend in Toronto when you come up empty, you come up a little light on the undercard. Ain't going to work in the desert. Luke, I felt like this was a power statement, right?
Yeah, it was a power statement. And people are like, I don't want Saudi Arabia dictating to UFC what to do. And it's like, well, I don't either, but they already accepted their money. So that ship has sailed. Dude, I mean, if you're paying $20 million, and I don't think fans understand how absurd that is. That 20? Is
because they
just
for comparison, there's people believe that they're paying WWE $55 million per event, and they're doing anywhere from 1 to 3 events per year in Saudi.
Yeah, I mean, the report was it was 20 million, but I mean, it could be in excess of that. I mean, here's what I'm trying to point out, BC. These numbers are like 10x of what you would normally see somewhere else, including more than that. I mean, these are absurd amounts of money that just don't happen, frankly, anywhere else in the world. These people are paying money to get a certain kind of service. And listen, let me be clear about where I stand on this issue. I don't want any business being done with any, frankly, kind of sovereign wealth fund or any petrol state or any government. I don't want any fight sports to be involved with that. But here's the reality. They all are. All of the fight sports are. All of the boxing promoters, nearly all of them anyway, have, and MMA seems to have been lined up in that way to get money as well. And even in the case of one championship, BC, they didn't go to Saudi, but they went to Qatar to obviously get the similar kind of sovereign wealth fund access, right? They're all trying to do this sort of thing. I don't actually think in the long term this is a good thing for boxing, but that's a separate conversation for a different time. And we've also talked about all the sports washing. I would just say that, to me, there's been a series of political events that recently have dramatically undermined, if not completely eradicated, any moral authority that Western nations have had. And so it creates the situation where, look, these guys are paying for a service, whether you like their involvement or you don't, whether you think it's good or it's not. If I were them and I was paying $20 million for a site fee, I'd be demanding more than a fight night. And BC, it should also be noted, we had Kareem Zidane on this very channel. I interviewed him. He called it in that interview. In that interview, he said he would not be surprised if the Saudis rejected a fight night for how lackluster it ultimately is. These folks are going to have the World Cup here pretty soon. You think they give a shit about a fight night card that the UFC is putting? So in the end, I don't know what they're ultimately going to settle on, but it is a bad look for the UFC that, granted, it's probably the best that PFL could do to have a PFL versus Bellator card. But nevertheless, their best was still better than what this first offering was from the UFC. Dude, the Saudis, again, I'm going to say it, for better or for worse, the only thing they want is grandiosity. Either provide that or they're going to tell you to pound sand. And they told them to pound sand.
It's just, I wonder if there's a deeper connection or worry there, because think about it. The Saudis just put $100 million into PFL as an investor. And then we know.
So my understanding is that's not quite right. My understanding is they have promised $100 million, but it's delivered once the event is actually over. They didn't just put $100 million in there.
Well, you know, that leaves you to believe that if they want to, they can continue to fund PFL and really try to change the free agent market. Would it behoove UFC to get on their bad side, Luke? I don't know. I don't know what I mean. Like, would it, like, in this larger?
I don't think they're going to be on the bad side. I think ultimately both parties in their particular logic, Saudi Arabia would quote unquote win by having a big UFC event there, and UFC I think wants to have a big event there for all the reasons aforementioned. I don't think they want to get sideways. I just think it's, remember that Mick Maynard tweet? He's like, which of these events have been bad? And it's like, Mick, buddy, I don't think he's a bad matchmaker, but you just got to look at this from outside the bubble. Numerous of the events you put together, or I should say the company puts together, because he doesn't do it by himself, but the company puts together, are deeply uninteresting. And the Saudis looking back at you and saying, we're not saying these are bad fighters. We're just saying there's no celebrity, there's no stakes, there's not really much attached to this. Why the fuck should we care? This is the interesting part. People aren't pleased with the Saudis kind of sock puppeting it the whole way and making these broad declarations. At the same time, it does kind of mirror some of the complaints you've heard from the fan base about some of the lackluster nature of the cards, absent the pay-per-views. And it kind of reflected a bit of I won't say malaise, but a bit of a broader concern that came from a different place. They kind of met in the middle.
Well, after this announcement happened, everyone who lived through the WWE's initial movement to Saudi, when the Saudi government specifically gave them a list of wrestlers that they demanded that be on the cards, and most of them were retired, which brought Shawn Michaels out of retirement, brought Goldberg back. Famously, they wanted Yokozuna, Luke, who died many decades ago, so they brought a generic sumo wrestler into this Ultimate Royal Rumble. A lot of people going, does that mean we're going to get Habib, GSP, and all these others back just because there's so much money and the Sheik wants it, Luke? Or what should I call him? I don't know. If I don't call him His Excellency, Luke, what am I supposed to call him? His name?
How about his name? You can call him Turkey.
All right, I'm talking about Turkey. There we go. Let's talk Turkey with Turkey. There it is. That's it. That's the show for today. Thank you to Michael Mormile, CBS Sports, who has our back. And Luke, a reminder once more, we'll be back live on Monday. Of course, you're doing the 279 pay-per-view post-fight live Saturday night. We're going to be jumping in and out over the next month and a half. We're going to have previews, reviews. We're going to hit you with content, but give us this chance to put the curtain down, rebuild everything, because Luke, we said it off the top. A lot of people have conspiracy theories about what this announcement or lack of announcement really means. Hey, guys, if you remember what you thought was the best of MK and you want more of that, our goal is to give you that. That's what this is all about. So get ready, because we're coming on in a massive, massive. Okay?
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah, everybody who has proffered a theory has offered a very bad one that is in no way accurate. So congrats.
Yeah. You're going to be blown away. You're going to love the way it looks on you. I guarantee it. Thank you. No need to eulogize us. Luke, anything else you want to say to the people on the way out?
Come see me post UFC 297.
All right. Come see him. There you go. That's the show. UFC 297 preview in the books. Take care of yourselves. We'll be around. You'll see us. We'll be back live Monday. Love you.